Welcome back to Creative Excuses. Today we are back for our second spooky season build. This time a werewolf costume for all of you sorcerers, arcanists, and templars. This werewolf is ready to play for either update 47 or update 48 because there were basically no combat changes in this patch. The build today is fairly simple, but there are a couple of neat tricks that we're going to be using which tickle my brain just a little bit. But as a preview, I scored 305,000 in Vateshran Hollows on this thing. I soloed a Harrowstorm, and I took on what I think is the hardest world boss in the game, which is pretty exciting. If you want to cosplay as your favorite werewolf for spooky season, this is a great build to do it with. Let's jump into it. So just like my previous subclassing builds on my channel, we are not going to go over every detail of the setup. For that, you can pause the video here and look at the Superstar screenshot, or check out the written build in my Discord, linked in the description. There is a forum post in my server dedicated to this build, where you can ask questions and get answers if you need them, or discuss the build with others. Though this setup can take on solo design content and the hardest overland content in the game, I wouldn't try it through veteran DLC dungeons alone. Though it should also prove a solid group damage dealer if you want to run some dungeons with, 3 other werewolves. Sounds like a lot of fun. Alright, so we aren't talking about every detail, but we do need to talk about the skill lines on this puppy because they are incredibly important. The 3 skill lines you choose here can greatly impact your damage on a werewolf. When soloing, these 3 skill lines are the best. In Hyper's recent werewolf DPS build video, he said that assassination is the best, and that is probably true in groups where you can regularly flank targets, but we can't while soloing, so some of his other suggestions are better, and these 3 are kind of the only options in town. There are technically other options if you aren't using one of the 3 classes that these skill lines come from, but those other options don't really matter that much. Their damage bonuses are pretty negligible in comparison. Anyway, here are our 3 skill lines: Stormcalling, Aedric Spear, and Herald of the Tome. Now, unlike all of my previous builds, these skill lines only matter here for their passives, so we're going to go over each of the applicable ones and how they help us out in our werewolf form. First up, Stormcalling. One thing that werewolves can very easily struggle with is sustain, and Stormcalling gives us a decent tool to mitigate that through the Capacitor passive, which grants us a healthy amount of magicka, stamina, and health recovery, all of which are useful on the build. The magicka recovery will help ensure we always have access to our burst heal, the health recovery helps bring in just a tiny bit extra health every 2 seconds, and the stamina recovery helps us sustain our rotations, which is very, very stamina heavy. Werewolf abilities are not cheap. We've also got Energize, which adds 5% damage done to all of our physical damage, which is a little under 50% of our overall damage. It isn't a massive boost, but it does beef up our main spammable, Howl of Agony, quite nicely. It can also boost Selene if you use that monster set, and it will boost up the Sundered status effect that we get from spamming Howl. Stormcalling also comes with Amplitude, which provides a very nice bonus to our damage done at the beginning of a fight. This damage bonus applies in our werewolf form just like our other 2 Stormcalling passives, so it is one of our bigger damage boosts available to us. Unfortunately though, Expert Mage does nothing for us because we can't place our sorcerer abilities on our werewolf bar. If we could though, the Storm Wolf would go so hard. These passives combine to make a very nice offensive base for this build, just like a lot of 1-bar builds. Stormcalling really is a 1-bar staple because the passives and skills it offers are just so versatile and good for solo play especially. Next up we have Aedric Spear, which only has 2 relevant passives that do anything for us while we're a werewolf: Burning Light and Balanced Warrior. Burning Light contributes almost 5% of our overall damage by just dealing damage for us every time we deal damage to something 4 times. Up to once every 2 seconds. It's very nice. It's just free damage. It's great. Balanced Warrior, on the other hand, just adds some weapon and spell damage and a little bit of armor. This is super simple, but it is very, very good, and it's stacked with our other weapon and spell damage buffs quite nicely. Turns out that Templar's free damage passives are just as good here as they are on other classes. It's a shame that we can't take advantage of that 12% crit damage though. Finally, for the skill lines, we have Herald of the Tome, and this one is the interesting one. There are 2 useful passives here: Psychic Legion and Harness Quintessence. Psychic Legion just gives us increased status effect chance, which is great, and it increases our status effect damage too. Awesome. That means our dual wield weapon glyphs get to pop off just a little bit more. It also means that we're going to get some extra hemorrhaging from our light attack werewolf berserker bleed, and we will get solid sundered uptime for extra weapon and spell damage, as well as minor breach. Awesome all around. However, Harnessed Quintessence is the interesting one. Each time you restore resources, you gain a 284 weapon and spell damage buff for 10 seconds. That is a lot of weapon and spell damage, but it only works when you restore resources with something other than your natural recoveries. For example, drinking a potion will recover some resources and give us the buff for 10 seconds, but the potion is only up every 45 seconds. Minor Magicka Steal will proc this passive for us because it restores Magicka when you deal damage to a target, and so on. We have a couple of options for proccing this passive. First, we can use a Restore Stamina glyph on our weapon, which works really well. I actually got my highest parse during testing using a glyph on my weapon to proc this passive. However, while that setup was the peak, it felt very inconsistent. I could snag that 51k every once in a while, but I could also very regularly hit around like 45 to 47,000 DPS, which was not ideal. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on, so I just started changing stuff. One of the things that I changed was how I procced Harness Quintessence. Instead of using a weapon glyph, I swapped to Feral Pounce from Brutal Pounce. The advantage here is twofold. First, Feral Pounce means I can get 100% uptime on Harness Quintessence while using 2 damage glyphs like Poison and Shock, Fire and Poison, or Fire and Shock glyphs, all of which are decent options. That's because Feral Pounce restores 100 stamina every time it deals damage. The other thing that it let me do was ignore casting Feral Pounce on cooldown. You see, Brutal Pounce needs to be kept up 100% of the time to provide its big weapon and spell damage buff. And it's an expensive skill to cast. It takes 2 ability casts to keep up the Brutal Pounce buff, and you have to recast it before it runs out, or you'll lose the buff. Turns out, though my peak damage was higher, those early recasts took a big toll on the consistency of my damage and made the rotation a lot harder to time. If your rotation and weaving is perfect, Brutal Pounce is definitely better. It's just too much weapon and spell damage not to be. But if your weaving is just a little slow like mine is, I got way more consistent performance out of maximizing my weapon glyphs by using Feral Pounce to proc Harness Quintessence instead. Feral Pounce doesn't care if you let it run out, so you always maximize your damage per cast, and that is a great thing. It's just the easier version to use. Okay, enough about ourselves now though. What about the costume? What do we use as a werewolf? Here are the skills that we're going to use as the wolf. Howl of Agony. This is a fantastic main spammable. It hits really hard because we have access to Off Balance and the Exploiter passive, which stacks nicely with its own internal damage buff against off balance targets. Awesome, this thing hits like a truck, it's great. We also have Feral Pounce, which we just talked about a little bit too much. You jump and then you slash, and that slash is an execute damage bleed that can scale quite high. It's a great skill, and the movement that it gives you is part of what makes you able to move through Vateshran Hollows so quickly. Next, we have Claws of Life, which functions as an area of effect spammable and a damage over time that heals us whenever it deals damage. In trash packs, this can provide a bunch of healing even while it takes down a lot of enemies at once. This ability is great. Next, we have Deafening Roar, which is our source of major breach and our source of major problems in group content. If you're in a group, use the other morph of this. Otherwise, your occasional heavy attacks are going to taunt enemies and you're gonna die. Unless you're the tank, but you shouldn't be the tank in this build. Don't tank in this build. This major breach is incredibly important, and you should use this on cooldown every 10 seconds. Finally, for our active skills, we have Hircine's Rage, which is our burst heal and some extra stamina sustain if we pop it at full health, which can also be very useful instead of heavy attacking. Remember, heavy attacking on this setup is actually a damage loss from just light attack weaving a howl, so you only want to heavy attack during off balance periods, and only if you really need that stamina. Now the last ability is our ultimate, which while you're in werewolf form is just a passive. We are using Werewolf Berserker because it just deals so much more damage. It's like a 5 to 6k DPS difference, which is a huge deal. The bleed from this doubles the damage of your light attacks, which is awesome. And that's pretty much the build. But there are 3 more things that seem important enough to warrant talking about here, so let's go over those. Weapon choice, monster set, and 1 champion point node. For the weapons, dual wield is best, even though you're not really using your weapons, because dual wield gets the beefed up weapon and spell damage of being a melee offensive weapon like a two-hander, but it comes with the additional advantage of split damage glyphs, which gives more opportunity for status effects. This is one of the reasons that dual wield is actually so often the front bar DPS choice over a two-hander for melee builds. However, though you should be using dual wield here, the weapon skill line passives do not actually apply even a little bit while in werewolf form, so it doesn't really matter what weapons you use. Daggers, maces, axes, swords, whatever. You have claws, you're just here for the 2 weapon glyphs and the extra weapon and spell damage. You can of course use a 2-hander, but you are going to lose out a little bit on your status effect damage. You can also use a sword and shield if you want for additional armor and stamina, but you're going to want to use a double dot poison instead of an enchant here, as that usually outperforms a half value glyph like a one-handed shield gets, in my experience. For the monster set choice, we have 2 good options, Selene or Veladreth. Selene is the higher single target damage by a decent margin, but Veladreth is excellent cleave, and has become one of my personal favorite damage sets. Veladreth makes actual content easier in my book, and was the key change that let me kill the hardest world boss in the game, so I am a big fan. Cleave is also pretty lacking on wolves, so it helps make up for that weak spot without sacrificing too much of your single target damage. Finally, there is one champion point node that solves our last remaining problem, healing. Claws of Life is a great heal over time, and you have a good burst heal, but in a lot of fights that just isn't enough, so we are slotting in Reaving Blows in the blue tree to make sure that our light attacks, heavy attacks, initial Claws of Life damage, and our juicy spammable all heal us a decent bit. This adds so much to our healing that we really can't skip out on it. Reaving Blows goes a long, long way. And that really is the build, everyone, but like I said, there is so much more that goes into a build, like the food, the potions, the champion points, armor weights, armor traits, enchants, and of course, the sets. Pause the video here to see all that information on this superstar screen, but even better, check out my Discord server linked in the description where I have a full written guide with these parse screenshots and any extra variants in case you need a different monster set. I've got one more spooky season build planned, a vampire this time, so get subscribed or join my Discord to be notified when I post that one. And if you missed my Soul Harvester Necromancer, check out that video linked here. It's a fun magic and necromancer which I have not played in a long, long time, and it's a blast. Until next time, enjoy the rest of this gameplay, and I'll see you all in the next excuse.
such a creature for this challenge. Vateshran's rights now end. You did more than we expected. Well done.